Welcome to CalmSpectre. Before we begin, find your most comfortable position. Adjust your blankets, ensure the light is low, and let the sounds of the world outside fade into the background. Tonight, we are not just telling a story, we are conducting an investigation into the very nature of fear. We are traveling to the village of Medveja, near the banks of the western Morava River, in the year 1731. This is the expansive, terrifyingly detailed account of Arnold Paole. To understand the terror that gripped Medveja, one must first understand the man. Arnold Paole was not a creature of myth. He was a soldier, a hajduk. He was a man who had spent his life on the borders of empires, fighting in the brutal wars between the Austrians and the Turks. He was a man of discipline, scarred by battle and weary of blood. When he finally completed his service and returned to his home village, he was seeking nothing more than the quiet life of a farmer. But Arnold carried a shadow with him. Even as he tilled the soil and courted a local woman, the villagers noticed a change in him. The soldier was silent, his eyes often fixed on the distant horizon, as if watching for an invisible enemy. He was a man haunted. Eventually, he confessed to his wife the source of his melancholy. He told her that during his time in Turkish Serbia, near a place called Gosowa, he had been haunted by a vampire. He claimed that the creature had followed him, and in a desperate bid to cleanse himself, he had eaten earth from the vampire's grave and rubbed himself with its blood. He believed he was cured. He believed the shadow had stayed in the south. He was wrong. In the late summer of 1726, Arnold Paole fell from a hay wagon. It was a mundane accident, a moment of clumsiness that seemed insignificant for a man who had survived the blades of the Ottoman infantry. But the fall was fatal. Arnold broke his neck and died almost instantly. The village mourned him. He was a good man, a respected neighbor. They buried him with the full rites of the church, and for 40 days the village of Medveja was at peace. Then the sun went down on the 40th night. It began with a sensation, a feeling of being watched from the dark corners of the cottages. 4 villagers, all healthy and strong, came forward with identical stories. They claimed that Arnold Paole had returned. He didn't look like a soldier anymore. He looked pale, his movements fluid and silent. He appeared in their doorways, standing in the moonlight, beckoning them to follow him into the fields. Within days, these 4 witnesses were dead. Their bodies showed no signs of illness, only a profound, unnatural exhaustion. The fear in Medveja was not like the fear in other villages. These were people who lived on the edge of the wilderness. They knew the difference between a wolf and a ghost. They knew that something had followed Arnold Paole back from the war, and now that he was dead, it had claimed him. The local elders knew what had to be done. They could not wait for the winter. They could not wait for more deaths. They petitioned the military authorities. They needed an official to witness what they were about to do, for the law of the land required a record of all things, even the things that shouldn't exist. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon of the Serbian hills, the village of Medveja transformed. During the day, it was a place of labor, the sound of scythes through wheat, the lowing of cattle, the sharp scent of pine and wood smoke. But as the twilight deepened into a bruised purple, the air became thick with a palpable dread. The villagers began to see the world through the lens of the supernatural. Every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of the wind in the tall grass was no longer just a sound. It was a potential footstep of the undead. The 4 victims who had died shortly after Arnold's burial had left a void in the community. Their deaths were not quiet. They had spoken of Arnold's visitations with a frantic, wide-eyed terror that lingered in the minds of those they left behind. They described him standing at the foot of their beds, his military uniform tattered and caked with the dry earth of his own grave. He did not speak, they said. He simply stared with a gaze that felt like cold iron pressing against their souls. The local priest, a man who had seen much of life's brutality, found his prayers felt hollow against this specific darkness. He spent his nights clutching his cross, listening to the dogs of the village. They were the first to truly know. The village dogs did not bark at the shadow of Arnold Paole. They whimpered. They hid under porches, their hackles raised, tracking something invisible that moved through the mud of the village lanes. By the time the autumn rains began to turn the earth into a sodden, grey mess, the village elders had reached their limit. They knew that in Serbian tradition, 40 days was the critical window. If a vampire was not dealt with by then, it would grow stronger, eventually becoming a vampire that could pass for a living man during the day, making it impossible to catch. They felt the clock ticking in their very bones. They sent a formal plea to the Austrian military command in Belgrade. They did not ask for soldiers or bread. They asked for a medico, a man of science, to witness the opening of the graves. They knew that if they acted alone, they might be accused of desecration or pagan rituals. They wanted the authority of the empire to stand behind the stake. Wait for a moment. Imagine the journey of the messenger. A lone rider traveling through the dense fog-laden forests, carrying a letter that spoke of a dead soldier walking the earth. The Austrian authorities, initially dismissive, could not ignore the volume of reports coming from the frontier. They realized that if the peasants were convinced a vampire was among them, they would stop farming, stop paying taxes, and perhaps even flee, leaving the border vulnerable to the Turks. Finally, a commission was formed. It was a strange assembly, military officers in their bright uniforms, a surgeon with his kit of silver tools, and local hayduks who knew the land. They began the long trek to Medveja. As they rode, the officers joked about peasant superstitions, but the further they moved into the interior, the quieter they became. The landscape itself seemed to conspire against logic. The trees grew in twisted, tormented shapes, and the mist never truly lifted, even at noon. When the commission finally arrived at the gates of Medveja, they were met not with cheers, but with a terrifying, hollow silence. The villagers stood in their doorways, their faces pale and drawn. They didn't need to speak. Their eyes told the story of weeks spent without sleep, of ears strained to hear the sound of a dead man knocking. The leader of the commission, a man of rigid discipline, ordered the exhumation for the following morning. That night the officers stayed in the village inn. They kept a fire roaring in the hearth, but it did little to cut the chill. Every man in that room kept his saber close to his bed. They were men who had faced cannons and bayonets, but the thought of what lay beneath the soil of the local cemetery made their hands tremble as they poured their wine. Outside, the rain continued to fall, a slow, rhythmic drumming on the thatch roofs. This is the sound of the Serbian night, a sound that masks the footsteps of the restless, a sound that washes away the footprints of the dead. The morning of the exhumation broke not with a sun, but with a thin, sickly grey light that seemed to filter through a veil of leaden clouds. There was no bird song in Medveja that day. The only sound was the rhythmic, heavy tolling of the village bell, a slow, mournful signal that the time for reckoning had come. The commission, led by the military surgeon and the grim-faced officers, made their way toward the cemetery. It was located on a slight rise at the edge of the woods, a place where the grass grew thick and tangled over the leaning wooden crosses. Behind them followed the villagers, a silent procession of shadows wrapped in heavy wool and furs. They carried the tools of their grim necessity, iron-tipped shovels, heavy mallets, and long sharpened stakes of hawthorn freshly cut and still weeping sap. As they reached the mound that marked Arnold Paole's final resting place, a strange phenomenon occurred. The surgeon, a man who had dissected hundreds of bodies on the battlefields of Europe, noted that the earth above Arnold's grave seemed loose. It was as if the soil had been disturbed, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. Small holes, no larger than a man's fist, peppered the surface of the mound. looking like vents for some subterranean breath. The officers stepped back, their hands instinctively moving to the hilts of their swords. The skepticism that had fueled their jokes the night before had evaporated in the damp morning air. "Dig," the lead officer commanded, his voice cracking slightly. The sound of the shovels hitting the earth was visceral, a wet, heavy thud that felt like a heartbeat. As the men dug deeper, the smell began to change. Usually, a grave that had been occupied for weeks would emit the sweet, cloying stench of rot. But here the air remained strangely neutral, smelling only of cold clay and old rain. Minutes turned into an eternity. The tension was so thick it felt as though the very air was pressing against their lungs. Then the sound changed. The hollow wooden thud of a shovel hitting the lid of the coffin echoed through the cemetery. A collective gasp escaped the villagers. Some fell to their knees, crossing themselves with trembling fingers. The surgeon stepped forward, his face a mask of professional detachment that barely hid his inner turmoil. He ordered the men to pry open the lid. The wood groaned under the pressure of the iron bars, a sound like a dying animal, until finally, with a sharp crack, the coffin was exposed to the light of day. The men who were prying the lid back recoiled instantly, one of them falling backward into the mud, his eyes wide with horror. Arnold Paole did not look dead. He lay in the coffin in a state that defied every medical text known to the Austrian Empire. His body was not stiffened by rigor mortis, nor was it collapsed by the hollow wasting of decay. Instead, he appeared robust, almost swollen with a terrifying vitality. His skin was not the gray of parchment or the yellow of bile. It was a deep, vibrant carnation pink, as if the blood was still rushing through his veins with the heat of a fever. But it was the face that truly shattered the surgeon's composure. Arnold's eyes were half open, not glazed and clouded, but dark and seemingly focused on the gray sky above. His mouth was slightly parted, revealing teeth that seemed longer, sharper than those of a common farmer, and there, staining the corners of his lips and matting his beard, was the evidence of his nocturnal crimes, liquid, vibrant, completely fresh blood. The surgeon leaned in, his breath hitching. He noticed that Arnold's old skin and nails had fallen away. They lay like discarded husks at the bottom of the coffin. In their place, new skin had grown, skin as soft as a newborn's and new nails that were curved and sharp as talons. "He is not decomposing," the surgeon whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "He is changing." The villagers didn't need a medical diagnosis. They knew what they saw. To them, this was not a miracle of biology, but a blasphemy of the soul. The soldier had not died. He had been transformed into a vessel for a hunger that would never be satisfied. The hunger that had claimed 4 lives already was staring back at them from the wooden box. The lead officer looked at the surgeon, seeking a logical explanation, but found none. The surgeon's hands, usually so steady with a scalpel, were shaking. He simply nodded toward the villagers, giving the silent permission they had been waiting for. The executioner stepped forward, the hawthorn stake gripped in his calloused hands. The sun tried to break through the clouds for a brief moment, casting a pale, ghostly light over the scene. The mallet was raised high, its shadow falling across the chest of the undead soldier. The silence in the cemetery was so absolute that the heartbeat of every man present seemed to pulse in their ears. The executioner stood over the open coffin, his shadow draped across the unnatural pink flesh of Arnold Paole. He positioned the point of the hawthorn stake directly over the heart, the organ that, according to the surgeon's bewildered notes, appeared to still hold the warmth of life. With a grunt of primal effort, the mallet descended. The wood met the chest with a sound that haunted the witnesses until their dying days. It was not the sound of wood striking bone, but the sound of something liquid, something pressurized. As the stake pierced the heart, Arnold Paole's body did not remain still. The corpse convulsed, the limbs jerking in a violent rhythmic spasm. A torrent of blood, described in the official Austrian reports as completely fluid and fresh, geysered from the wound and the mouth, drenching the earth of the grave. And then the sound. A sharp, rattling gasp escaped the parted lips of the soldier, a scream that started deep in the chest and broke into a high-pitched whistle of escaping air. It was as if the very essence of the shadow that had occupied Arnold was being forcibly expelled. After a final, agonizing shiver, the body collapsed into itself. The vibrant color drained away instantly, replaced by the gray sunken hue of true death. The soldier was finally gone. But the horror was not contained to a single grave. The villagers, led by the commission, proceeded to exhume the 4 victims Arnold had claimed. In each coffin, they found the same terrifying sight. Bodies that refused to rot, faces stained with the same vibrant life fluid. One by one, the stakes were driven home. One by one, the screams echoed through the trees of Medveja. To ensure the village was cleansed, the commission ordered a massive fire to be built at the edge of the woods. The bodies were cast into the flames, their ashes scattered into the Morava River. They believed they had won. They believed the curse was broken. However, the shadow of Arnold Paole was more insidious than they imagined. Before his second death, Arnold had fed upon the village cattle. The villagers, unaware of the corruption, had in turn eaten the meat of those animals. The vampiric contagion had entered the very bloodline of the community. 5 years later, in 1731, the deaths began again. This time, 17 people died in a single month, including infants and the elderly. The surgeon, Johann Flukinger, was sent by the emperor to conduct a second investigation. His report, Visum et Repertum, became the most famous document in the history of the supernatural. He concluded that the vampire was not a ghost, but a physical plague that transformed the very biology of its victims. As the sun finally sets on the story of Arnold Paole, the village of Medveja fades into the mists of time. The screams have long since died away, replaced by the soft rhythmic drumming of the rain on the Serbian soil. The fire that consumed the soldier has turned to cold ash. The earth is once again heavy and silent. You can rest now. The village is quiet. The borders are secure. The shadows are just shadows once more. Listen to the rain. Let it wash away the remnants of the story. Let the warmth of your room be your fortress. The night is long, but it is peaceful. The journey is over. The sleep begins. Stay calm. Stay safe.